Hi everyone, today I want to cover the basics of writing and reading files with Python, so let's get into it. So this is our code for now, and let's talk about this. So here we define a string, which is the path where we want to write data to. Now filestream has an important function, which is the open function. And the open function is very general. We can use it to read and write. And what we are actually doing depends on the mode, which is given here as the second argument. We'd have the string w, which stands for write. Later we'll also see the use of the r keyword here to read from a file. And what we simply do is the first keyword is the path where we want to write to. And with this, we're all set up to simply call from this file stream the write function and pass it a string that we want to write to file. Now the two strings we want to write is first hello file and then where have you been all my life. So let's see how this looks. But first we also need to remember we want to always close the file stream when we're done with it. Otherwise there might be problems with actually writing the data to file. Now let's execute this code and see what happens. What happened is a file was created here, which is exactly called as we defined. It's called my data dump right here. And if we try to look at it, it actually has the string that we defined. But you might realize this is just on the same line. And that is because write functions that are called after each other, they simply append more strings to that same file. And they don't necessarily know what it means to have a new line. So a line break, for example. So what we should do is, if we want to have these two lines separate, we need to insert a new line character for ourselves. And that new line character is /n. And this is a special escape character. So this backslash essentially says that this character here is supposed to be interpreted in a special way. It's not simply \n. And now we'll execute the same code. And here we have this new line, which in my editor here is just this CRLF. But we see that where have you been all my life is now on a new line. And that's simply this /n character. And you might realize neither the backslash nor the n is actually in the file as characters, but they're a special character. They represent the new line character. So much for writing to files. You can get surprisingly far with just writing strings. And as an example, I can show you something I've done with Pygame recently. This is simply a text file that represents all the events that happened while a Pygame loop was running. This also uses the open function and then the write function, and you can get a massive file here with all the events that happened while this Pygame loop was running. If you're not familiar with Pygame, don't worry about it. This is just to show that you can really write a lot of data by simply writing strings. And here, for example, these are the milliseconds, and the milliseconds are just separated from the actual event here by a tab. This yellow arrow here in my editor represents a tab. And this is also a special character, the \t character. So let's look now at how to read strings from files. To read strings from files, we use this script, and the file we want to read is this one here, much data. So let's see what happens when we execute this file. What we got is actually a sine wave. There was a sine wave in this file the whole time. And if we look at it, yeah, there's a bunch of numbers in there, but we wouldn't necessarily suspect that it is a sine wave. And again, these numbers, they're on one line and they're simply tab delimited. The tab character tells us where one number ends and the one begins. Let's see how we accomplish this. So don't worry about NumPy and matplotlib yet if you're not familiar with. This is just to plot the sine wave later on. But it's the same thing as before. We just have the file path here, which leads to our file right there. And then we open it, but instead of opening it with the W character for mode, we open it with the R character right here. So we're now in read mode. And then we simply type data raw equals filestream.read. And this simply returns to us everything that is in that file into the name data raw. Now let's take a quick look at data raw. So there's not a lot to get out of here, but we see, okay, there's some numbers in here there with this scientific notation with the E character. And then there's this \t. And as I just told you, this \t just means a tab. This is the tab character. And well, what do we do if we want to get onto single numbers? Because this is just one giant string. So how do we get the single numbers out of there? And the answer is really simple. We use the split method. We use the split method and we split by this t character. So we'll get a list of all these numbers around the t character. Let's take a quick look at that. So this is now our list. And each entry in that list is a single number. Now you might notice there's this empty one in the back, and that's because the file also ends with a tab. So this line here is simply used to filter out any empty items in the list. Then we just convert it to a string, to an array, and then we plot it. And as I showed you, the plot that comes out of it is this one. It's a sine wave that I wrote it, creating it with NumPy, and I wrote it to a file, also with NumPy. And the default there is, or not the default, but you can use a function of the NumPy array to save all the numbers as text. Again, it's just text, and then we can read that data. So these are the basics of reading and writing files in Python. There's other ways to make your data persistent, as we call it. Because if you're programming in Python, if you're just programming away, you have a lot of variables, but as soon as you close Python, all those variables are gone for the moment. They're gone unless you hard-coded them in the code. Then you can just get them back by executing your script. But a lot of the times when we do calculations, we want to save the results of those calculations in a way that is, as we say, persistent. And persistent simply means that it will survive us closing Python. So it will stick around on the hard disk of the computer as a file. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And the open function with read and write is the most common one, but there are other tools in Python. For example, the shelf package, which I will make a separate video about. Shelving simply means to save Python objects in a dictionary-like structure that lives in a file. This is a really convenient way to save things that I use quite a lot. So I hope you enjoyed this video about reading and writing stuff in Python, and I hope to see you in the next one. See you then.